In 1950, more than 900,000 people called Cleveland home. Steel plants roared, the shipyards never slept, and it looked like this Midwest powerhouse could only keep rising. But the very infrastructure that built Cleveland's peak would become its trap. Jobs vanished, tax revenue shrank, and the city began to unravel in ways that few outsiders ever saw coming. How did a top United States city end up as the symbol of urban decline, and what hidden forces really set everything in motion? Long before Cleveland became a city of smokestacks and crowded neighborhoods, its future was shaped by geography. Perched at the southern edge of Lake Erie, the city's shoreline offered a natural deep-water port, one of the best on the Great Lakes. In 1827, the Ohio and Erie Canal opened, cutting a watery path from Cleveland's harbor all the way to the Ohio River. This single project turned a sleepy town into a vital link between the Midwest and the rest of the world. Barges loaded with grain, lumber, and iron ore moved through the canal, feeding a growing appetite for industry. Railroads soon followed, crisscrossing the city and connecting it to Pittsburgh, Chicago, and New York. By the late 1830s, Cleveland's industrial engine had already started. Iron foundries, soap makers, breweries, and flour mills lined the banks of the Cuyahoga River. The city's location made it the natural meeting point for raw materials from the interior and finished goods bound for distant markets. Shipyards flourished. By 1863, nearly a quarter of all Great Lakes ships were built here, and that share doubled just 2 years later. Every whistle and clang from the flats signaled another load of iron or coal passing through, fueling the factories that would soon define the city's skyline. After the Civil War, Cleveland's industrial might only grew. Iron and steel took center stage, with metalworking and machine shops employing thousands. By 1880, iron and steel made up a fifth of the city's manufacturing, and heavy industry became the backbone of the local economy. Entrepreneurs saw opportunity everywhere. In 1870, a young John D. Rockefeller founded Standard Oil in Cleveland, transforming the city into the capital of American refining. His company's sprawl of refineries and chemical plants churned out more than 300 products, making oil as central to Cleveland's story as steel. Other names followed. Sherwin-Williams opened its first paint factory in 1866, laying the groundwork for a chemical and coatings industry that would last for generations. The city's shipyards built freighters and tankers that carried ore, coal, and oil across the lakes, while rail yards handled a constant stream of freight. By the 1920s, Cleveland was home to the Cleveland Clinic, Republic Steel, and a growing roster of manufacturers producing everything from car parts to electrical equipment. This was a city built for scale. Its infrastructure, from canals and docks to railroads and sprawling factories, was designed to move mountains of raw material and finished goods. For decades, this system worked. Cleveland became one of America's largest cities, its neighborhoods packed with families, drawn by the promise of steady work and rising fortunes. But the very machinery that powered Cleveland's rise would set the stage for challenges ahead. As the city expanded to fit the needs of heavy industry, it created a footprint that would prove difficult to sustain when the economic tides began to shift. In 1950, Cleveland reached a height few American cities could claim. The census counted 914,808 people living within its borders, more than San Francisco or Boston at the time. Factories ran day and night, neighborhoods bustled, and the city's skyline stood as a monument to industrial ambition. But hidden beneath the pride of that population peak was a quiet vulnerability. The city had built itself for growth, broad avenues, sewer lines, water mains, schools, and parks all designed to serve nearly 1 million residents. Every block laid and every pipe buried was an investment in a future that seemed guaranteed. But these investments came with a catch. Their cost did not shrink when the city stopped growing. Roads still needed repairs, schools still required teachers, and the massive machinery of city services kept turning, whether the population was rising or falling. As families began moving to new suburbs, the city's tax receipts started to thin. The loss was not dramatic at first, a few thousand people each year, a handful of shuttered storefronts, a slow uptick in vacant homes. But the math was relentless. Fewer people meant fewer property taxes and less revenue from local businesses, while the bills for maintaining Cleveland's vast infrastructure stayed the same. The city budget, once buoyed by a growing workforce and booming industries, began to strain under the pressure. This was the paradox at the heart of Cleveland's success. The very scale that had allowed it to thrive now became a liability. Fixed costs, those unyielding expenses for keeping water flowing, lights on, and streets clear, did not care if a neighborhood had 1,000 residents or just a handful. As the number of taxpayers shrank, each remaining household carried a heavier share of the burden. City leaders faced impossible choices: cut services and risk further decline, or raise taxes and drive more families away. The budget became a silent character in Cleveland's story, shaping decisions in council chambers and at kitchen tables alike. What once felt like a permanent advantage, size, reach, and capacity, was quietly turning into a trap. The warning signs were easy to overlook in the afterglow of the city's golden era. But the cracks were spreading. The population graph, once a steady climb, had started its long descent. Cleveland was entering a new era, one where the old rules no longer applied. The city's infrastructure, built for a world that was slipping away, would soon face pressures it was not designed to withstand. And as the tax base continued to erode, the consequences would ripple far beyond the city limits. Steel once defined Cleveland's skyline and payrolls, but by the late 1970s, the city's industrial engine was running out of steam. Foreign steel began flooding American markets, undercutting prices and exposing the age of Cleveland's mills. While Japanese and European producers invested in state-of-the-art furnaces and automation, many local plants were still using equipment installed before World War II. Capital spending lagged. Owners hesitated to modernize, wary of shrinking profits and growing uncertainty. Numbers told the story. In 1979, U.S. steel imports hit record highs, capturing nearly a quarter of the American market. Cleveland's biggest employers, Republic Steel, U.S. Steel, Jones and Laughlin, and LTV, faced relentless competition. Orders slowed. Maintenance was deferred. Executives weighed the cost of upgrades against the risk that demand might never return. For some, the math no longer worked. Closures began to ripple through the city. In the late 1970s, Republic idled blast furnaces along the Cuyahoga. LTV, formed from the merger of Jones and Laughlin and Republic, struggled to keep its Cleveland operations afloat. By the early 1980s, entire departments were shuttered as contracts dried up. The auto parts sector, once a reliable pillar, faced similar pressure. Foreign automakers expanded their share of the U.S. market, and domestic manufacturers slashed orders for Cleveland-made components. Plants that had run 3 shifts during the post-war boom now sat silent for days at a time. The wave crested in the mid-1980s. LTV Steel, after years of patchwork fixes and emergency loans, announced a major shutdown of its Cleveland area facilities. Rolling mills, coke plants, and foundries, some employing generations of the same families, locked their gates. The city lost not just jobs, but the steady contracts that fed dozens of machine shops, suppliers, and neighborhood businesses. Corporate decisions, often made in distant boardrooms, shaped the fate of local plants. As profits shrank, headquarters prioritized newer, more efficient sites in the South or overseas. Investment flowed away from Cleveland, leaving behind a patchwork of half-used buildings and rusting machinery. The old industrial logic, build big, run hot, employ thousands, no longer matched the realities of global trade and automation. Every closure set off a chain reaction. Laid-off workers spent less at local stores. Tax revenue fell. City services strained to cover the same miles of streets and pipes with fewer dollars. The collapse played out in boardroom memos and press releases, but its effects landed hardest on the neighborhoods that had once lived by the rhythm of the mills. By the end of the decade, the city's industrial map was dotted with the scars of retreat, empty lots where furnaces once burned, silent yards where boxcars had lined up for shipments. The mechanics of decline were not sudden, but they were relentless. Unemployment lines stretched down city blocks in the early 1980s, a stark reversal for neighborhoods that once thrived on steady paychecks from the mills and factories. By 1983, Cleveland's unemployment rate had soared to 13.8%, one of the highest in the country at the time. The numbers told only part of the story. Each layoff at a steel plant or auto parts supplier set off a ripple effect. Machine shops that had filled urgent orders for decades found their phones silent. Nearby diners, hardware stores, and corner groceries watched regular customers disappear. The shock for many families came quickly. One week, a worker might be clocking overtime on the blast furnace floor, the next a pink slip and a final paycheck. Some tried to hold on, looking for work in shrinking job ads or taking temporary gigs far below their old wages. Others packed up and left, hoping for better luck in the Sun Belt or on the West Coast. The impact went far beyond the gates of any single plant. Suppliers that made everything from nuts and bolts to industrial lubricants lost their biggest accounts. Trucking companies found fewer loads to move. Even local banks felt the strain, as loan defaults ticked upward and savings accounts dwindled. Public schools, once buoyed by industrial tax dollars, faced shrinking budgets. Teachers were laid off, class sizes grew, and after-school programs vanished. City services, trash collection, street repairs, and fire stations were cut back or consolidated. In some neighborhoods, streetlights were left dark to save money. Parks grew over with weeds as maintenance was deferred, and recreation centers closed their doors. Small business owners who had built their livelihoods on the rhythm of shift changes and paydays faced impossible choices. Some tried to pivot, selling different goods or cutting hours. Many simply locked up for good. The loss of each storefront chipped away at a sense of community that had held for generations. The pain was not distributed evenly. Working-class neighborhoods, especially those closest to the industrial corridor, bore the brunt. In places like Slavic Village and Collinwood, unemployment rates soared even higher than the city average. Multi-generational households stretched unemployment checks and food stamps, while local churches and charities struggled to keep up with demand for hot meals and winter coats. The social fabric began to fray. Empty houses multiplied as families abandoned mortgages they could no longer pay. Crime rates edged upward, fueled by desperation and dwindling opportunities. Young people, seeing fewer reasons to stay, left in search of futures elsewhere. For those who remained, each day brought reminders of what had been lost. The clang of the mills was replaced by silence, broken only by the wind rattling through boarded-up windows. The collapse of Cleveland's industrial ecosystem was not just an economic event, it was a human one, reshaping daily life and dimming hopes for the future. The scars left behind would set the stage for an even deeper crisis as the city's reputation and social stability came under threat. On a Sunday morning in June 1969, the surface of the Cuyahoga River caught fire. A passing train sent sparks raining down onto a slick of oil and debris. Flames leapt up, fueled by years of industrial runoff, grease, chemicals, and waste dumped straight into the water by factories lining the banks. The fire burned for less than half an hour, and it did little direct damage. But the real impact came weeks later, when photographs and headlines splashed across national magazines. Time called the Cuyahoga the river that oozes rather than flows, and the country took notice. This was not the first time the river had burned. Since the late 1800s, at least a dozen fires had flared up, including a massive blaze in 1952 that destroyed boats and bridges. For decades, these incidents barely registered outside Cleveland. But by 1969, the mood in America was changing. Environmental awareness was rising, and the image of a river on fire right in the heart of a major city became impossible to ignore. Cleveland, once celebrated for its industry, now found itself branded as a warning. The Cuyahoga Fire became a symbol overnight. News stories painted Cleveland as the face of unchecked pollution. National television showed smoke curling up from the water, steel mills looming in the background. The city's reputation, already battered by job losses and empty factories, took another hit. Investors, politicians, and families saw the headlines and wondered if Cleveland's best days were behind it. The shock of the fire did not just echo through the press. In Washington, lawmakers pointed to the Cuyahoga as proof that tougher rules were needed. Within a year, Congress created the Environmental Protection Agency. The Clean Water Act followed soon after, setting new standards for rivers and lakes across the country. Locally, the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District formed to overhaul the city's aging wastewater system, pouring billions into treatment plants and sewer upgrades. But the stain lingered. The burning river became shorthand for decline, a punchline in late-night jokes and a cautionary tale in textbooks. For Clevelanders, it was a bitter reminder of what happens when growth outpaces care. The fire did not cause the city's unraveling, but it made that unraveling visible and impossible to ignore. The fear was not just for the river. It was for what else might catch fire if the city could not change course. After the river fire, another force was reshaping Cleveland from the inside out. The city's boundaries stayed the same, but its people and resources began to slip away. Federal highway construction carved through established neighborhoods, laying concrete ribbons that made it easier than ever to leave the city behind. Interstates like Interstate 71 and Interstate 77 sliced across the urban grid, connecting new suburbs to downtown, but dividing communities in their path. Whole blocks were cleared, and families who had lived side by side for generations found themselves displaced by the promise of faster commutes and suburban lawns. Banks and mortgage lenders drew invisible lines on city maps, marking some areas as safe bets and others as too risky for loans or investment. Redlining locked many black and working-class families out of the post-war housing boom. While new subdivisions sprouted on the city's edge, homes in central Cleveland aged and emptied. Property values stagnated. Vacant lots multiplied. The city's tax base, once broad and deep, began to thin as families with means chose to settle in places with newer schools and quieter streets. The feedback loop took hold. As residents moved out, city services struggled to keep up with the sprawling footprint left behind. Fewer taxpayers meant less money for everything from trash pickup to police patrols. Schools closed or consolidated, and parks fell into disrepair. Each cutback made city life a little harder, nudging more families to consider a move. The cycle repeated: less money, fewer services, more departures. In the summer of 1966, the Hogue neighborhood erupted. Days of unrest followed the refusal of service to a black customer at a local bar, but the roots ran deeper. Years of disinvestment, overcrowded housing, and limited opportunity. 4 nights of violence left 4 people dead, dozens injured, and hundreds arrested. National Guard troops patrolled the streets. For many, the unrest confirmed fears that the city's core was unraveling. Businesses shuttered, investment dried up, the scars lingered long after the headlines faded. By the early 1970s, the hollowing out was impossible to ignore. Storefronts stood empty along once busy corridors. Entire blocks of houses were boarded up or demolished. Yet the city still had to maintain miles of roads, pipes, and wires designed for a population that was no longer there. The numbers on the city's balance sheet grew more lopsided with every family that left. Cleveland's footprint remained large, but its core was slowly draining away, setting the stage for a fiscal crisis that would soon make national news. By late 1978, Cleveland's finances were stretched to the breaking point. The city owed $15.5 million in short-term notes, a debt that needed to be rolled over just to keep the lights on. For years, city leaders had plugged budget gaps by borrowing from the future and quietly shifting money from municipal utilities like Muni Light and the water department into the general fund. These off-balance transfers kept basic services running, but left the city exposed when creditors lost confidence. Banks and local lenders, already wary after years of unpaid bills and political turmoil, demanded that Cleveland settle its mounting debts to Cleveland Electric Illuminating, more than $16 million, before they would refinance. The core of the dispute centered on Muni Light, the city-owned electric utility. Some council members pushed to sell it off to raise cash and pay creditors. Mayor Dennis Kucinich refused, arguing that selling Muni would hand a public asset to a private monopoly and drive up rates for residents. The standoff grew bitter. With no agreement in sight, lenders drew a line. They refused to renew the city's short-term notes unless Muni Light was sold. City Hall scrambled for alternatives, but the numbers did not work. On December 15, 1978, Cleveland defaulted. unable to pay off its notes or borrow new money. It was the first major United States city to default since the Great Depression. The moment sealed a national image of a city in trouble. The mechanics of collapse were brutally simple and painfully familiar. Mounting short-term debt, a shrinking tax base, and a political impasse over whether to sell the city's own electric company combined to make borrowing impossible. The fallout reached far beyond City Hall as Cleveland's reputation with investors and the rest of the country took a lasting hit. Cleveland's financial collapse did more than make headlines. It cast a long shadow over the city's future. In the months after default, the city found itself locked out of the municipal bond market. Lenders who once competed for Cleveland's business now kept their distance, wary of unpaid notes and political infighting. Credit rating agencies, already alarmed by years of budget tricks and missed payments, issued downgrades that labeled Cleveland's debt as too risky to touch. For city leaders, the consequences were immediate and unforgiving. The usual tools for managing repairs, building new schools, or fixing water lines, short-term borrowing and long-term bonds, were suddenly out of reach or came with punishing interest rates. The city's reputation among investors plummeted. Even as officials scrambled to restructure notes and negotiate with creditors, skepticism lingered. Large banks demanded stricter oversight and higher returns before agreeing to new deals. Some projects stalled for years, waiting for the city's finances to stabilize. Others were abandoned entirely, leaving vacant lots and unfinished plans across neighborhoods that needed help most. This period of market exile forced Cleveland to operate on a shoestring, cutting deeper into services already strained by job loss and population decline. The stigma of default did not fade quickly. For years, the city's name carried a warning in financial circles, a reminder that even a major American city could fall out of favor almost overnight. Cleveland would have to find new sources of strength before investors would trust it again. While Cleveland's old industries faded, new engines of growth began to take root in the heart of the city. The Cleveland Clinic, founded in 1921, expanded dramatically in the 1980s and 1990s, transforming into one of the world's leading medical centers. By the early 2000s, the clinic alone employed tens of thousands, drawing patients and specialists from across the globe. Nearby, university hospitals and Case Western Reserve University added their own weight, anchoring a corridor of research, education, and healthcare that brought steady jobs and attracted investment even as manufacturing vanished. Downtown, a different kind of revival took shape. In 1995, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame opened on the Lake Erie waterfront, its glass pyramids signaling a new era for the city's image. The Gateway Complex, home to the Guardians and the Cavaliers, rose on the eastern edge of downtown, drawing crowds and sparking fresh energy in once quiet streets. New restaurants, theaters, and apartments followed as developers bet on a future beyond smokestacks. Cultural institutions played their part as well. The Cleveland Museum of Art, Playhouse Square, and the orchestra helped keep the city on the national map, attracting visitors and supporting creative jobs. These anchors did not erase the losses of the Piet, but they offered proof that parts of Cleveland could still grow, adapt, and inspire pride. In some neighborhoods, new construction and rising property values hinted at a comeback that was real, at least in pockets. But the story of revival was never citywide, and for every thriving corridor, there were blocks left waiting for their turn. Cleveland's population, once counted in the hundreds of thousands per square mile, has settled at a fraction of its former size. The 2020 census recorded just over 372,000 residents, less than half of what the city held at its peak. But the numbers alone do not tell the whole story. Some neighborhoods, like Tremont and Ohio City, have found new life. Restored houses, coffee shops, and galleries line their streets, drawing both longtime residents and newcomers looking for affordable city living. In these pockets, vacancy rates have fallen and property values have climbed, hinting at a kind of urban comeback, yet just a few miles away, the picture changes. In wards east of downtown, blocks of empty lots stretch between clusters of occupied homes. Vacancy rates in some of these areas remain stubbornly high, with 1 in 5 houses sitting empty. Residents describe a sense of isolation, streetlights that flicker out, sidewalks that crumble, and the silence of entire sections where families once gathered on front porches. The city's infrastructure, built for 1 million people, now serves far fewer. Water mains, roads, and schools sprawl across a landscape that no longer matches the population they were meant to support. Each year, the cost of maintaining this oversized system weighs heavily on the city budget, leaving less room for new investment. This uneven geography shapes daily life. In some neighborhoods, optimism is visible in new construction and bustling sidewalks. In others, the scars of decline linger in boarded windows and overgrown lots. For many Clevelanders, the reality is not one of simple decline or revival, but a patchwork, some places moving forward, others still waiting for a second chance. Cleveland's skyline still stands, but its foundations are forever changed. Across the U.S., over 2,000 cities have lost population since 1950, a reminder that decline is not just history, but an ongoing test of adaptation. The scars of deindustrialization shape neighborhoods, budgets, and futures. How cities confront these legacies will define their next chapter and ours. What city should we unravel next? Share your story in the comments below.